That's right, folks. Spider-Man is, in fact, Peter Parker.
Okay, and then I'm gonna make some like kind of joke about the Spider-Mobile and bada bing bada boom, Ben's your uncle, there's your video. I'm sorry, you want it done in how long? 15 minutes? Complete Spider-Man movie timeline, complete with No Way Home spoilers, explained. Go! Okay, so it all started back in the year 2002, a simpler time, back when people walked around with their faces exposed to the elements and 28-year-old men went to high school with sexy werewolves. Peter Parker here is a normal little nerdling whose best friend is Harry Osborn, son of rich genius Norman Osborn.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
And these two, their paths intersect in an exceptionally convenient way. The same week that Normie experiments on himself with super soldier serum, Pete goes on a field trip and winds up bitten by a radioactive spider. Bada bing bada boom, dude gets buff. Also, gross wrist holes and psychic abilities to sense danger. You know, like a spider. Pete immediately tries to capitalize on his spider powers by partaking in a wrestling match so he can afford a car to impress his high school crush, Mary Jane Watson, who, by the way, is stooping Deathstroke. Pete gets screwed over by the promoter, who is immediately robbed. Now, Pete lets the burglar go. Uncle Ben tries to reason with the robber's partner, Flint Marko, who in a moment of distraction shoots and kills Ben. The two get away, but Peter tracks down and kills Mr. Frosted Locks over here. So anyway, Pete graduates and starts to clean up the streets of New York. He becomes a huge hit. Street buskers make songs about him. The Daily Bugle decides he's a menace. Life is going according to plan.
Guy with 8 hands. Sounds hot.
Unfortunately, there's a big green sum gun going around vaporizing corporate executives, which Spidey seems to think is a bad thing. He winds up battling Green Goblin, the name Duplum of Norman Osborn, thanks to this funky get-up, complete with a green metal tribal mask? Sure. The two battle it out. Gobby tries to get Spidey to join him. Pete says, nah dog, I'm good, and they battle some more. Aunt May gets hospitalized. It's a whole thing. Finally, they meet in battle one last time after a game of the Hottie or the Naughties, and Norman winds up inadvertently impaling himself with his own glider. Whoopsie! Harry is sad. Meanwhile, Pete decides he's too dangerous to date MJ, and besides, he has this memory to keep him going for many lonely evenings going forward. He decides to move forward alone, as Spider-Man. 2 years later, Pete's doing his thing, delivering pizzas and kicking butt as Spider-Man, but something ain't right, and he's randomly losing his powers. Ruh-roh. At this same time, Harry Osborn is proud of his latest project, an endless energy source developed by Dr. Otto Octavius. You know the story. Doc becomes a sort of mentor to Peter, the big day comes for mini-sun time, Octavius shows off his fancy metal arms, complete with definitely not going to take over his mind inhibitor chip, then Otto makes a whoopsie and winds up inadvertently getting his wife killed. Harry's even more of an embarrassment than ever.
I'm ruined.
And perhaps more unfortunately, Doc Ock winds up with a split personality predominantly controlled by his evil octopus arms. I'm not going to dig into all the intricacies of the plot since, you know, this isn't some opportunistic clickbait or whatever. But suffice to say, Doc Ock decides he's going to rebuild his machine and prove himself, superior, while Pete gives up the Spider-Man mantle and decides he's going to reinitiate that whole Mary Jane relationship thing. Of course, he has to eventually overcome his web block, gross sentence, ew, and take on the nefarious Doc Ock after Harry gives the Mad Doctor the tritium he needs for his mini-sun in exchange for Spider-Man. That arrangement leads to Harry finding out Spidey's identity and Mary Jane getting captured by Doc Ock, and so Spidey rescues MJ and convinces the good doctor to abandon the experiment after revealing that he is Spider-Man, leading to Doc Ock sacrificing himself. Sad. After that, Harry gets his normie vision and discovers his father's dark secret. In Spider-Man 3, a year has passed, and Peter is doing pretty nicely. Heck, Spider-Man is getting the key to the city. Peter's head is getting bigger, and he has the absolute gall to reenact his famous upside-down kiss with Gwen Stacy. And he finds out via the Popo that Uncle Ben's real killer is Flint Marko, who is on the run and just so happens to wind up falling into a particle accelerator that bonds his body with sand, turning him into Sandman. Oh, also there's this dweeb named Eddie Brock gunning for Pete's job, a rando alien symbiote has infiltrated his apartment, and his former best friend Harry has turned into an evil Power Ranger intent on murdering Spider-Man. Look, a lot happens. It's a wild flick. Peter turns into a massive prick after the symbiote gives him that iconic and quite slimming black costume. He gets Brock fired after dude fakes his Spidey photos. Harry does his best impression of a soap opera villain and tears Pete's relationship with MJ apart after getting over amnesia from a bad fall. But then, Dance Dance Revolution Spidey basically blows him up and the symbiote winds up taking over Eddie Brock after being rejected by its boyfriend. This all culminates in Venom kidnapping MJ, of course, and with the help of Sandman, he tries to kill Parker only for Harry to redeem himself and help to defeat the duo at the expense of, well, his life. Whoopsie! Peter kills Venom with a little surround sound and a well-placed goblin bomb, and Sandman just kinda accepts that Pete's an okay dude and explains that what happened with Uncle Ben was an accident and all is forgiven, and he blows his popsicle stand. Peter and MJ basically live happily ever after. We don't know if this jazz club sequence is the beginning of that or if they go through more trials and tribulations, but Peter Parker in this universe finally more or less settles down with Mary Jane and lives happily ever after. Again, at least as far as we know. Okay, so our second universe and therefore second timeline is that of the Amazing Spider-Man films. TASM is a bit, complicated. Our story starts in the year 2000 when 4-year-old Peter is left with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben by his parents Richard and Mary Parker, who then wound up seemingly perishing in a plane crash while trying to upload a video which will explain his work in cross-species genetics at Oscorp. With them gone, so goes all of their research, really screwing over a certain Dr. Curt Connors with whom Richard was conducting his work. In March of 2013, Peter's in high school where he is, well, not as much of a loser as Tobey Maguire, but, you know, he's kind of an edgy loner who, you know, gets beaten up by jock types for standing up for the little guy, that sort of thing. Luckily for him, this gets him the attention of Gwen Stacy. Less lucky for her. The same day he gets beaten up, he discovers an old briefcase of his father's within which he finds a photo of his dad with Dr. Connors. Oh, also a calculator, a work ID, a secret folder full of sciencey junk, and these glasses that just so happen to be his exact prescription. Just a lucky 30-year-old kid. Anyway, Pete uses the power of everyone's favorite search engine, Bing, to find out more about Dr. Connors and winds up at Oscorp, where Gwen coincidentally works as an intern for Dr. Connors. Yeah, lots of coincidences in these movies. After meeting Connors and getting found out by Gwen, Peter bumps into an Oscorp exec who drops this folder, which, oh come on, it's the same as the folder with his dad. Anyway, long story short, Peter winds up in a genetically enhanced spider room and gets bitten by one of them suckers. Tale as old as time, you know. He gets the spider power, some douchebag places a bottle of beer on his head in the subway, and he does a really impressive pole routine. Using the knowledge from his father's papers, Peter helps Kurt to transfer a lizard's limb regrowth ability to a mouse. That night, Ben gets shot trying to stop a robber Peter let go in spite. Through his search for the murderer, Peter is inspired to create his web shooters and that red and blue suit because, you know, he's freaking Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Connors is pressured to start human trials. At the risk of losing his life's work yet again, he attempts the tried and true method of self-experimentation and, well, he turns into a giant maniacal lizard person with dreams of turning the world into lizards. Comics. Pete meets Gwen's dad, Captain Stacy, who he has a rocky start with, but that's okay because Gwen is super into it. Peter figures out through, let's call it detective work, that Connors is the lizard and tries to stop him before he enacts his lizard world plan. Scaly Boy is, of course, stopped by Spidey with the help of a bunch of crane operators who definitely didn't make me cry in theaters in 2012. He's also aided by Captain Stacy, who sadly gets murderized by the lizard, and in his dying breath, he has Peter promise not to involve Gwen in his life. Peter does not do that. Dr. Connors, in full lizard mode, is presumably taken to MCUville, but it's impossible to tell when that happens. Anyway, 2 years later, we have TASM 2, wherein Spidey and his dope new suit save Max Dillon here during a chase with the Rhino, right before graduating high school, and he and Gwen break up. It's okay, though. They get back together. But, well, it's not. That's bad. Whatever. Spider-Man does his thing, Max basically does a Riddler from Batman Forever cosplay, and Harry Osborn returns to town to get shit-talked by his dying father and reconnect with his childhood friend. His dad dies after explaining that Harry's screwed because even as a cameo, Norman Osborn is a huge dick. So Max falls into a vat of electric eels and is transformed into the walking dubstep soundtrack Electro. Due to a misunderstanding with Spider-Man in Times Square, he attacks the Webhead, who wins out, and Electro is sent to Ravencroft to be experimented upon. Harry tries to use Peter to get to Spider-Man, who he believes can help him find the cure he's looking for. Peter refuses, but visits Harry as Spider-Man, just to refuse some more, because he's a douche. After Harry is framed and fired by this douche canoe, he's basically had it up to here with all these jerkwads and winds up going to Electro to partner up like proper bad guys. Meanwhile, Peter finds his dad's secret subway lab via coins he finds in his dad's old calculator. It's silly. Harry gets his hands on the spider venom squirreled away by Oscorp in special projects, injects it, and well, it's Gobby time, baby. Peter, he gets back with Gwen in super romantic fashion, but their reunion is short-lived. Electro goes to absorb all of New York's power supply, and after a little web shooter upgrade, Spidey and Electro battle it out. Gwen helps to save the day, only for Gobby to show up and throw her down a clock tower. Again, tale as old as time. Peter fails to save her in time, and I just said time twice in a row. That's bad writing. But she's killed. Everyone's sad, Dennis Leary was right, and Peter, as we will come to learn, never quite gets over it. Gobby starts forming his Sinister Six, and 5 months after Gwen's death, Spidey is seemingly no more. However, thanks to an Aunt May pep talk and some past words from Gwen, he realizes he has to hold on to hope and goes to fight the Rhino. It's a pretty beautiful conclusion, but again, sadly only leads to darkness for the character. So, we now move on to the MCU. How am I doing on time? Terrible? Yeah, okay. Our story technically starts a short time after the Battle of New York in 2012, when Adrian Toomes and his crew are doing their cleanup job. But they're pushed out by damage control, thereby screwing him and his team out of a much-needed job. He takes this poorly. But hey, jumping back a bit to jump forward, MCU Spider-Man gets bit by a radioactive spider off-screen, and at the time of Civil War, which takes place in 2016, he's basically a D-list hero patrolling the streets of New York in a homemade suit. While he's still doing this, a certain Quentin Beck has his work disparaged by Tony Stark. Speaking of Stark, he gives Pete a visit, Happy Hogan does some babysitting, and one big ol' upgrade later, he's in Germany fighting it out with the Avengers. And that's about it for Captain America Civil War, actually. He helps out, shows off, quips a little,
"You have the right to remain silent!"
and is sent home by good dad Tony Stark. Spider-Man Homecoming takes place 2 months later, although there is some timeline wackiness happening with the MCU at this point, but all said and done, and taking into account filmmakers correcting themselves, it takes place 4 years after Avengers in 2016. Yeah, I know it says 8 years later at the start, but no. Adrian Toomes has just stolen a military flight suit and has amassed a bit of a minor empire using salvaged and stolen technology from various Avengers-related incidents. Peter Parker is in high school. He's got his best friend Ned and crushes on Liz and just does high school nerd junk like debate club. He's also your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It's great. Ned quickly finds out his identity, and they're doing cringy high school stuff when Spidey stumbles upon a group of criminals sporting Chitauri technology, a tech which previously blew up Mr. Delmar's bodega during an earlier fight, so like, this is kind of a big deal. But Iron Man tells him to cool it and not engage with these guys. Peter does not listen, so he screws everything up. Iron Man saves the day and takes Peter's suit. Womp womp. So, Peter winds up asking Liz to homecoming, and things start to go a little bit better until he arrives to pick her up at home, and her dad's the freaking Vulture. Guys, you know how it is. After a little intimidation, some shocker shenanigans, and a mid-air heist gone wrong, Spider-Man utilizes all that he has at his disposal and takes down Vulture. Liz is out, MJ exists, Peter gets his suit back, and Aunt May finds out his secret. Boom! In 2018, Peter Parker sees Ebony Maw's ship in New York and suits up to help. He gets beamed up, and while gripping onto the side of the ship, he's given a new armored suit, and Tony sends him back to Earth. An important moment, by the way, as it shows how much Tony wants to protect Peter, making the final moments extra sad. But hey, Spidey hangs on and takes a trip to space with his favorite father figure. And honestly, he doesn't do much more outside of just helping his part of the team to stop Thanos. I mean, there is one moment.
You're an Avenger now.
And he does a great job. Unfortunately, well, Star-Lord is a very emotional man, and one whoopsie later...
I don't feel so good.
Boy, every time, just ruins me. So Peter is snapped away. Give me a minute, guys. Okay, 5 years later, the remaining Avengers do their whole time travel world-saving routine, and bada bing bada boom, Hulk takes the hard snap and brings everyone back, including our dear Mr. Parker. Oh god, there's Hawkeye making me cry. Oh gosh darn, even freaking Hawkeye. Anyway, Pete returns in the big climactic battle. Stark hugs the hell out of him, and...
We won.
God dang it, movie. Peter witnesses Tony sacrifice himself for the greater good, and he's at his funeral. And moving on. Spider-Man Far From Home takes place in the summer of 2024, 8 months after Endgame. Peter goes on a little Euro trip, sans Spidey suit, ready to rest and relax with his fellow classmates. Then Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, shows up to contend with that big holographic thing we all thought was Hydro Man in the trailer. So Pete's brought in by Nick Fury to help with a multiversal disturbance that turns out to be, well, Quentin Beck using drones and holographic technology to turn himself into a superhero in order to get back at Stark and essentially control the world as its savior. To do this, he cons Pete into giving him a pair of glasses given to him by Stark, which come with a whole buttload of responsibility. Unfortunately, Pete hasn't gotten that famous speech just yet, so he gets straight punked. I just realized, by the way, I could have started this timeline with Ralphie from A Christmas Story showing up in Iron Man, but oh, who has that time? Anyway, he and a bunch of other Stark employees are all part of the plot, because man, Tony Stark pissed off a lot of people. So, Pete gets his can handed to him, and with the help of Happy Hogan, develops his own Spider-Man suit to finally break away from Tony Stark's shadow, using Stark technology. Whatever. So Beck is pulling off another attack in London and is targeting Fury and Peter's friends. He manages to fight his way through the drones and gets to Beck, who takes a stray bullet like a champ. He dies, and the whole plan is foiled. Except, as Peter's swinging through New York, freshly back from his trip to Europe, and having finally gotten together with MJ, the Daily Bugle pops up, J. Jonah Jameson exists, much to plenty of theater applause, and a final message from Quentin Beck frames Spidey for his murder. Now, real quick, I just gotta mention Venom Let There Be Carnage, which exists in some part of the multiverse. As seen in the stinger for that film, Eddie Brock is transported through the multiverse to the Earth of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Presumably, shoot, I don't know, I guess the symbiote can see through the multiverse, then he technically knows Pete is Spider-Man? Whatever. Point is, he winds up in Mexico, where Venom immediately decides the poor kid on TV looks like a good barbecue dinner. So, finally, we come to No Way Home, which is a shockingly simple movie, actually. Peter and MJ try to escape the immediate onslaught of attention, but things kind of fall apart for them, Ned, and Aunt May. Luckily, all legal charges are dropped, thanks to good old Matt Murdock, who is never seen again after his one scene. For protection and solitude, Peter and May move into Happy's apartment. A few months later, everyone returns to school, but all the attention is just too much, and in a moment we can all obviously super relate to, Pete, MJ, and Ned are all turned down by MIT for all the baggage of being and knowing Spider-Man. So, Pete does the natural thing and asks Dr. Strange to erase everyone's memories. No, Pete, never change. Strange abandons the spell and locks it away after like 3 too many changes from Pete before kicking the kiddo out of the sanctum upon realizing he hadn't even bothered calling MIT about the problem, which, by the way, one of my favorite bits in the movie. Anywho, Pete tracks down the admissions lady he needs to speak with, and using the power of his words, manages to get her to reconsider him and his friends. Awesome. Roll credits. Oh wait, no, damage is already done, and 5 of our previously discussed bad boys have crossed over into the MCU. We got you Doc Ock, we got you Green Goblin, we got you the Lizard, we got the Sandman, and we got Electro. What is this, a crossover episode? So, Pete handily beats Doc Ock before going after the rest at the whim of Doctor Strange, and quickly captures all of them, ready to be sent back to their dimensions. Okay. Roll credits. Oh wait, no, Pete finds out that they all came from moments just before their own deaths while fighting Spider-Man, and has his classic morality to deal with, and traps Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension using math before absconding with his multi-dimensional rogues gallery and the spell. With a little help from science, he easily fixes Doc Ock's inhibitor chip and sets out to help all of them. Only for Green Goblin, previously a pretty chill but loony Norman, to about-face and screw everything up, killing May in the process just after she's given Peter the old great power speech. Shortly thereafter, Tobey Maguire Pete and Andrew Garfield Pete are brought in thanks to Ned apparently being a wizard, and the 3 Spider-Men wind up luring the baddies to the Statue of Liberty, which has been fitted with a shield to honor Captain America, which, you know, whatever it takes to end a Spider-Man movie in some sort of dilapidated or under construction building. During the battle, MJ falls in a way similar to Gwen Stacy, and TASM Spidey saves her, and the whole theater sobbed, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful, damn it. They defeat the baddies and turn Sandman and the Lizard into archive footage, Natch, before sending everyone, including freshly stabbed but totally fine Tobey, back to their worlds. Oh, also, Tom Hardy's Venom is also sent back to his world, but he leaves behind a little bit of symbiote because, sure. Unfortunately, in order to do that, Peter has to sacrifice basically everything. While they've been fighting, the universes have been opening up, a la the Loki finale, and Strange can't do anything. And of course, Norman destroyed the spell with the Goblin Bomb, so no help there. So Pete suggests just erasing himself from everyone's memory entirely, not just the fact that he's Spider-Man, Peter Parker as a whole, gone. And Strange, somewhat hesitant, agrees. He does a spell and rids the world of both immediate doom and all knowledge of Peter Parker as Pete says goodbye to MJ. A short time later, Peter heads to the donut shop where MJ works and sees that she and Ned have both gotten into MIT, and when speaking to MJ, there's no memory of him. He scraps what he planned to say and leaves. Somehow he manages to get an apartment in New York, which, sure, and makes a new, homemade, and extremely comics-accurate costume as he swings into the night, all his friends and family gone, ready to begin anew. Man, that's fucking heavy.
What, are you looking for a raise? Get out.
Now, I didn't bring up Into the Spider-Verse because, holy cow, this is a long video, so I just went with the live-action Spideys. That said, and I know this may be controversial for some of you, but after seeing No Way Home this week, Spider-Verse is still king, baby!